not active, so I think we're finished. The room was very dark, except for a night light behind the head of Shripada's bed. Voices were chanting softly, using only one tiny pair of candles for keeping rhythm. Suparari Swami was massaging Shripada's feet. Bhagavaji's right leg and Tamil Krishna's left arm. Suddenly Narayan's from Devananda Saraswati Mathura entered along with two of his men. Prabhupada's disciples immediately gave him a seat at the side of the bed. Sri Prabhupada began speaking, but so softly that Narayan had to lean over to hear. Seeing a conversation about to begin, the devotion in the room, numbering about 15 and 20, moved in closer. Sri Prabhupada began. Sri Prabhupada stand beside said that we should preach in Europe and America. This was his desire, and his other desire was that we would all work together jointly to preach. Yes, that is right, said Narayan. I didn't waste a single moment, said Prabhupada. I tried my best, and yet it has been successful to some extent. Sri Prabhupada's voice was choked with emotion. If we work conjointly, he continued, then as Sri Mahaprabhu said, Priti Viti, Sankirtan has great possibilities in my life, it's coming to an end. It is my desire that we all forgive me for my mistakes. My God brothers, when you are preaching at times there are some disputes and misunderstandings. Maybe I also committed some offences like that. Please ask them to forgive me when I am gone. We will all sit together and decide how you can manage for some Utsava or festival for me. How much should you pay? What do you think of this? Whatever instructions you give me, said Narayan Maharaj, I will follow them with absolute sincerity. I consider you my guru. Narayan Maharaj said that what Sri Prabhupada had created should be protected, and it was everyone's duty to do so. He pledged to help in whatever way he could. Sri Prabhupada inquired that his group brothers who had temples in Mathura Vrindavan were present, and Narayan Maharaj replied that most of them were out of station. Regarding Sri Prabhupada asking his group brothers for forgiveness, Narayan Maharaj said, they are all trivial things in this world, like preaching. If some little things go wrong here and there, what difference does it make? It is all right. Whatever you have done for the well-being of the entire human society. There is no individual interest. Everything was done in the interest of God. He advised that Sri Prabhupada not worry. His disciples were worthy and would maintain things. Therefore, Prabhupada should now simply think of the Lord. Maharaj then asked his assistant, Shishishai Brahmachari, to sing Rupamanjari Pada. While everyone listened in silence and Sri Prabhupada lay still, Shishishai Brahmachari sang the song very sweetly. Next, Narayan Maharaj sang a bhajan, finishing with his refrain, Jai Gurudev Jai Prabhupada. After a pause, Narayan Maharaj spoke again, this time referring to Sri Prabhupada's disciples. They should be told that they should never get motivated by their own self-interest. He said, they should make your mission successful. Sri Prabhupada ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 From Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 5, chapter 18, entitled Presence of Germany Buffer. Text 32 is that? Jarayujam Svetajam Andajobidam Jarayujam Svetajam Andajobidam Characharam Devarshi Pitri Bhutam Aindriyam Characharam Devarshi Pitri Bhutam Aindriyam Tyo Kam, Kshiti, Shaila, Sarit, Samudra, Jo Kam, Kshiti, Shaila, Sarit, Samudra, Dvipa, Graharksheti, Abideya, Eka, Dvipagraharkshetya Bideya Eka, Jarayujam Svetajam Andajobidam, Jarayujam Svetajam Andajobidam, Characharam Devashi Pitributam Aindram, Characharam Devashi Pitributam Aindriyam, Jokam Chiti Shaila Sarit Samudra, Jokam Chiti Shaila Sarit Samudra, Dvipagrahakshetya Bideya Eka, Dvipagrahakshetya Bideya Eka, Charayujam Svetajam Andajobidam, Characharam Devashi Pitributam Aindriyam, Jokam Chiti Shaila Sarit Samudra, Dvipagrahakshetya Bideya Eka. Please chant.
Jarayujam Svetajam Andajobidam, Jarayujam Svetajam Andajobidam, Characharam Devashikributam Indriyam, Characharam Devashikributam Indriyam, Jokam Shiti Shaila Sarit Samudra, Jokam Shiti Shaila Sarit Samudra, Dvipagrahakshetya Videya Ekam,
Janayujam Svedajam Andajobidam,
Janayujam Svedajam Andajobidam,
Characharam Devashikributam Indriyam,
Characharam Devashikributam Indriyam,
Jokam Shiti Shaila Sarit Samudra Dvipa,
Jokam Shiti Shaila Sarit Samudra,
Dvipagrahakshetya Videya Eka,
Dvipagrahakshetya Videya Eka.
Anyone else like to try? Brenda, do you want to try?
Janayajam Svetajam Antajobidam,
Jarayujam Svedajam Andajobidam,
Characharam Deva Shipitributam Andriyam,
Characharam Devashikributam Indriyam,
Jokam Shruti Shaila Shalit Samudra,
Jokam Shiti Shaila Sarit Samudra,
Dvipagraha Shitya Videya Eka.
Dvipagrahakshetya Videya Eka.
Thought somebody let a dog in there. Charayujam, one born from a womb. Svetajam, one born from perspiration. Andaja, one born from an egg. Ubidam, one born of the earth. Charaacharam, the moving and the stationary. Deva, the demigods. Rishi, the great sages. Pitri, the inhabitants of Pitriloka. Bhutam, material elements. Air, fire, water and earth. Ayendriyam, all the senses, Dio, the higher planetary systems, Kam, the sky, Kshiti, the earthly planets, Shaila, the hills and mountains, Sarit, the rivers, Samudra, the oceans, Dvipa, the islands, Graha Riksha, the stars and planets, Iti, thus, Abideya, to be variously named, Eka, one. Translation, my dear Lord, you manifest your different energies in countless forms as living entities born from wombs, from eggs, and from perspiration, as plants and trees that grow out of the earth, as all living entities, both moving and standing, including the demigods, the learned sages and the Pitas, as outer space, as the higher planetary system containing the heavenly planets, and as the planet Earth with its hills, rivers, seas, oceans, and islands. Indeed, all the stars and planets are simply manifestations of your different energies, but originally you are one without a second. Therefore, there's nothing beyond you. This entire cosmic manifestation is therefore not false, but is simply a temporary manifestation of your inconceivable energy. Okay, please repeat. My dear Lord, you manifest your different energies in countless forms as living entities born from wombs, from eggs, and from perspiration, as plants and trees that grow out of the earth, as all living entities, both moving and standing, including the demigods, the learned sages and the Pitas, as outer space, as the higher planetary system containing the heavenly planets, and as the planet Earth with its hills, rivers, seas, oceans, and islands. Indeed, all the stars and planets are simply manifestations of your different energies. But originally you are one without a second. Therefore, there's nothing beyond you. This entire cosmic manifestation is therefore not false, but is simply a temporary manifestation of your inconceivable energy. Sri Prabhupada's purport. This verse completely rejects the theory of Brahma, Satyam, Jagan, Mithya, which states that spirit or Brahman is real, whereas manifested material world with its great variety of things is false. Nothing is false. One thing may be permanent and another temporary, but both the permanent and the temporary are facts. For example, if someone becomes angry for a certain period, no one can say that his anger is false. It is simply temporary. Everything we experience in our daily lives is of the same character. It is temporary but real. The different kinds of living entities coming from various sources are very clearly described in this verse. Some are born from a womb, and some, like certain insects, from human perspiration. Others hatch from eggs, and still others sprout from the earth. A living entity takes birth under different circumstances according to his past activities, karma. Although the body of the living entity is material, it is never false. No one will accept the argument that since a person's material body is false, murder has no repercussions. Our material bodies are given to us according to our karma. And we must remain in our given bodies to enjoy the pains and pleasures of life. Our bodies cannot be called false, they are only temporary. In other words, the energy of the Supreme Lord is as permanent as the Lord himself, although his energy is sometimes manifest and sometimes not, as summarized in the Vedas, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. Everything is Brahman. Om Agyanatimarandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshumalitam Yana Tasmai Shigurave Namaha Kam Karoti Vachilam Bhangam Lagate Grim Yatripat Mam Bande Shigrim Dinataranam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gora Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. My dear Lord, you manifest your different energies in countless forms as living entities born from wombs, from eggs, and from perspiration, as plants and trees that grow out of the earth, as all living entities, both moving and standing, including the demigods, learned sages and the Pitas, as outer space, as a higher planetary system containing the heavenly planets, and as the planet Earth with its hills, rivers, seas, oceans, and islands. Indeed, all the stars and planets are simply manifestations of your different energies, but originally you are one without a second. Therefore, there's nothing beyond you. This entire cosmic manifestation is therefore not false, but is simply a temporary manifestation of your inconceivable energy. So the first point Prabhupada makes here is Brahma, Satyam, Jagan, Mithya. So this is a theory propagated by impersonalists. They say that Brahman is truth and the Jagan or the Jagat, just like we know Jagannath means the Lord of Universe, or Jagan means the universe. Satya means truth and Mithya means false. So they put this theory forward that everything we see manifest before us is false, it's an illusion, it's a dream, it's not real. But this philosophy is not practical, because you say, well, if it's not real, then just walk through that wall. If I bang your head off of that wall, if you call them to task to live up to their philosophy, then if that wall is not real and your head's not real, then it won't make any difference if I just bang your head off it, will it? And then say, and then they come up with some other word jugglery. So they don't. Their philosophy doesn't stand up to scrutiny. It's not practical. I did mention once before, but there was one devotee doing Sankirtan, and he met someone who purported himself to be a Mayavadi, and he was trying to come over kind of, as they sometimes do. They look down upon people who think in terms of duality, and they look down upon devotees thinking they're sentimentalists caught up in duality, and they said, oh, well, that's actually, we're all one, and this world's not real, and nothing belongs to anybody. So the devotee said, well, that's fine, so give me my wallet then. And so first of all, the devotee tells him, he says, so you really believe that, and blah, blah, and then, of course, the guy walked into it. And he says, well, in that case, also, what's yours is mine, what's mine is yours, yeah, so give me my wallet because I need it for something. And so he had to give it, he had to live up to his promise. Then he came back and he says, oh, could I get something for the bus? He says, just ask you over there, because that's you as well. And then he went away quite bewildered, because it just doesn't stand up to scrutiny, it's not practical. It just creates confusion. And the only thing which is illusory is that philosophy, that philosophy that we are all God, that we're all one. Now, here, Srila Prabhupada clearly makes a distinction that these are all separated energies, all these different living entities. So we are Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. We're simultaneously one with and separate from Lord. Achintya means inconceivable. So we find it inconceivable. And we find ourselves, as Javat Prabhu yesterday was talking about the marginal potency, Tatastha Shakti, we find ourselves in the material world, which is like a prison house. So just like in the prison, they make a very high fence surrounding the prison, strong bars, and they put very impregnable locks, etc. And they put people there to keep you in the prison. So in this prison house, all these planets are various levels of imprisonment. Some are higher planetary systems, just like in the jail. In prison, you may have someone who's got a bit more freedom to walk around. They've got a window with a view, but they're still incarcerated. They might get a bit more yard time. And then someone else may be in solitary confinement, and someone else may be something else. some other restrictions. So in the material world, the living entity is experiencing from the highest planetary system to the lowest imprisonment in the material body and confinement to a certain planet according to their karma in the previous life. And we have to pay our due. And while paying our due, if we commit more crimes while we're in the prison, then we extend our sentence. So this is what we're doing. This is called samsara, the wheel of birth and death. We keep perpetuating the karma. And because we've forgotten what is right and what's wrong, just like Srila Prabhupada, when he arrived in America, one reporter said to him, "What have you come to teach?" And Prabhupada replied, "I've come to teach you what you have forgotten." Because that knowledge which he's giving us from his own spiritual master, from the Guru Parampara, from the Shastra, that's already within us. But he's uncovering that knowledge. So he's telling us what we've forgotten. We've forgotten that we're eternally related to Krishna as his eternal parts and parcels. And we're thinking somehow or another we can say goodbye to Krishna and we'll make our own way. But here we can see, it should have been mentioned here in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that actually nothing exists which is not Krishna or one of his separated energies. See, the only thing which is not Krishna is Maya, and that's also Krishna. And we can think, well, why would Krishna give us Maya? Because he gives us freedom. If we don't have the freedom to choose, then how can there be love? We have to choose. You can't force love. And of course, while we're in this material world, it seems like a long time. But when it's all over, then we realize actually it was just a very, very short time. It was hardly even a blink. And the size of it, in the scale of eternity, then even if you're in the material world for millions of births, it's almost nothing. But while we're in it, then it's very real. And Prabhupada makes this point here that everything we experience in our daily lives is of the same character. It's temporary but real. So the Lord's separated energies are real. They're not imaginary. They are real. They're a fact. The earth, water, fire, air, ether. These are the 5 great elements. And they exist. We cannot say. And so if we really believe in the philosophy of Jagan, was it Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya, then put our hand in the fire to prove it. The body's not real, the fire's not real, so prove it, do it. But who can do it? Or remain underwater indefinitely and then come out again. But Krishna consciousness is practical because the devotee realizes that nothing is separate from Krishna. Everything is Krishna's. Therefore, the devotees don't just see Krishna in the temple. This is called the, what stage of Adhikari is this? The devotee only sees the Lord in the temple or the church or the mosque. Kanista. So Kanista, what does Kanista mean, anybody? Sorry. Unsteady, that's one explanation, yeah. Yeah. So it means neophyte, unsteady, still not fully convinced. Nista meaning faith, ka means without. So the faith is quite scant at this point. But by the association of advanced devotees, then the faith becomes steady. So if Kanistas only associate with Kanistas, they remain Kanistas. But we can associate with Madhyama Adhikaris. Interesting, this word Madhyam, an English word which would come from that. Sounds very similar. Medium. Yeah, like medium, middle. Also in the in the verse is the word Dio, the higher planetary systems. But also in other Sanskrit mantras, this refers to the Supreme Lord, Dio. And The word in Latin, Deo, or Dio, that's coming from this word also. So we'll see that many words are coming from Sanskrit. It can be traced back, like the word father, pater, pita, mother, mater, mata. So there's many, many words which originate from Sanskrit. Our friend Brian Fleming, who's amongst many things, he's an antiquarian book salesman, and he once gave me a dictionary which was from the 19th century, and it gave the etymology of the words. So it would say, like, for example, like that word father comes from Latin pater, which comes from the Sanskrit pita, and many of them were just going back not just to the first thing that came from, but where that came from as well. Nowadays they don't tend to do that, but when I read that book, I was realising there's a huge amount of things, at least which we know of, which was coming from Sanskrit. So this knowledge is eternal, and when we connect through as kanistas, or whether we're kanista, whether we're madhyam, or whether we're, what's the last one? Uttama Adhikari, just like the word ultimate. We are the topmost, or not we are, it means the topmost devotee. So whether we're in any of these, then we always continue with the same activities. It's not that we become Uttama Adhikari, then we don't have to chant. One disciple asked Prabhupada, when we go back to the spiritual world, do we have to chant? Prabhupada says, do you not want to? So a devotee wants to chant. They like chanting because it's associating with Krishna. They find great pleasure from chanting. So in the Kanista Adhikari stage, we may find chanting a bit of a chore. We might find service a chore. We might find sitting in class a chore. Usually we don't find prasadam a chore, so that's good. But Prabhupada said that we should apply ourselves with the same enthusiasm to everything, and come to the point where we're equally enthusiastic about any service, any aspect of Krishna consciousness. So if we're enthusiastic about some aspects and not some aspects, then it means that we still have some advancement to make. And even if one is on the highest platform, Uttama Adhikari, then they never give up chanting, they never give up following the rules. It's said that when one is on the topmost platform, then they don't have to follow the rules and regulations. So that doesn't mean to say that you have to follow them to a certain point and then you can go back to breaking them all again. Because it doesn't have to means at the beginning we have to do something because we don't want to do it. We want to do other things, like all the things. Some of the things we're quite happy to give up. Other things we're still holding on to, like our false ego, etc., or limited concept of things, or mundane opinions, things like that. These are more difficult things to give up than simply just gross sense objects. Giving up the gross sense objects is the beginning. We can separate ourselves from the sense objects. But the more challenging aspect of renunciation is to give up the desire. And the way to give that up is to replace that with trying to fulfill a higher desire, and that's the desire of the Lord. And when we do that, then the Lord reciprocates. He rewards us with higher realizations, which inspire us to go further and further. So the Uttama Adhikari, he never gives up hearing, chanting, associating with devotees, because he sees everything as related to the Lord. And this is the wonderful practical application of the Krishna conscious philosophy, that not just inside the temple, as soon as we're finished here in class today, we'll go out, we'll take prasadam, and we'll do some services. Whatever we're doing today, it will be in relation to Krishna, because we see everything's in relation to Krishna. And at home, we can see that our home is Krishna's. If we're at home, then make a little artwork with some nice pictures and offer all the food. And we keep the place nice and clean because we see this is Krishna's. Some people have this concept that Krishna is a guest in our house, but actually the real way is to see that we're the guest in Krishna's house. Just like here, we're in Krishna's living room here. And therefore, that's why it's important that we learn how to behave properly in front of the deities, such as avoiding offences. If the Supreme Lord comes in front of us, then we don't just fall asleep on him, or we don't just pass gas, or we don't just burp in his face or something like that, or start yawning and stretching in front of him. These are all signs of disrespect to a very important person. And it's also considered pointing your feet, because the feet are our lowest part. So that's why devotees sit cross-legged, or some of us have to sit in chairs. We don't sit with our feet pointing to the deities. That's considered rude. Sometimes people consider it rude if you point to them, right? We don't like being pointed to. It's almost like somebody's, invading our space. So we learn these things so that we get the best benefit of being in front of the deities. There's an interesting story. There was one man, he used to come to Soul Street Temple every few months, and he would just sit there all day long, just sit there cross-legged in front of the deities. And it happened a few times, and devotees asked him, if he'd read any books, why he comes here. And he says, I just come here, he says, and I just soak in this amazing energy, and then I'll go away, and then I can last about a few months, and then I come back again. So just by being in front of the deities, not even chanting, not even identify himself as a devotee, but he understood somehow or another. He was fortunate enough to understand that just being in the presence of the deities was actually very purifying and uplifting, and gave him so much strength. So we don't want to what we do want to get the best benefit of being in front of the deities. And of course, everything's Krishna's energies, but it's simultaneously one and different. It's just like you don't touch the Shastra with your feet. You don't touch the instruments. It's like if you want to move the harmonium, you don't kick it along the floor. One time, Prabhupada had seen a devotee doing that. It was a harmonium or a typewriter, and he chastised him and says, this is used for writing the books, for writing the letters. Why are you moving it with your feet? It's Krishna's tadiya, Krishna's energy. So we don't get confused and think, well, the whole planet's Krishna's. I can't touch it with my feet, so I have to kind of go about in my hands or my knees or something. So we don't take it to extreme measures. We have to understand that it's simultaneously one and different. And Lord Chaitanya showed that at a pastime. Do you remember that pastime? He was eating clay, was it?
Yeah.
Can anyone remember the pastime details of it? I think he was sitting on top of a pile of broken pots, and he was eating the clay or the earth. And he came out, his mother came out and says, what are you doing that? And said, basically he was kind of preaching Mayavadi philosophy that it's all one. And then she preached Atyancha Veda Veda Tattvatam, shows he was just doing this to make this point. That you eat out of a clay pot, but when you discard the clay pots, like in India, maybe not so much nowadays, but it used to be that they didn't have cans and bottles and styrofoam and plastic. They used to have leaf plates and clay pots. It was the original sustainable system. Still goes on in some places. And everybody had some kind of occupation. And then when people discarded things, it just went into the earth. And usually there'd be a place where you would discard all your clay cups You'd use it once, just like you use a plastic cup once and throw it away. You use a clay cup and chuck it away. After a little while, it all goes back in the earth to take it back up and remake it. Amazing. And they've been doing that as it states in the Ishopanishad. If one lives in this way, one can live for hundreds of years. So in other words, it's sustainable. It's just taking from the earth and giving back to the earth, not taking finite resources and diminishing the earth's resources. So there's actually no alternative to this way for mankind. This is stated in the Ishopanishad. We can try to stop using diesel cars and use electric cars, and then maybe we'll try using something else, but ultimately it's not sustainable because they're still taking finite resources. The only sustainable way is to actually refer to the Shastra, which is the handbooks for living in the material world. But at all costs, they never want to refer to the authority of the world. They want to remain the authority. Just like Prabhupada was talking about, I was just reading recently that the scientists become very proud of sending a Sputnik, into space, which is Krishna's space, as it's mentioned here. It's also Krishna. They're trying to escape. But then they don't, and they want some great credit for that. They stand there and they'll get a medal and they'll get an award, etc., for designing something which can orbit around the planet or go into outer space. But they don't want to give credit to God for floating these great Sputniks called planets. They don't want to give credit for that. They do some small, puny imitation, and then they want to be recognized for it. But they give no recognition for that, which is far greater. So this is men of small intelligence. And although we may not consider ourselves very intelligent, everybody sitting here today online, or anyone who's a devotee, is actually there amongst the most intelligent of human beings. And we're not saying that just to butter you up. That's because we've actually begun to accept and understand that there is a supreme controller. There is a cause beyond this cosmic manifestation. And that there is a life beyond this life, this temporary material life. So it's there's a part in, I can't remember the full verse, if anyone knows it, they can quote it. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about the living entities as being everywhere, sarvagata. Does anyone know the full verse, sarvagata?
It's in the second chapter, 24th verse.
Okay, and the rough translation of that is English.
Yeah, so so the soul cannot be after the burning, right? So it is perfectly situated in its determination, it's immovable, and it is all pervading.
Yeah, so this living entity is everywhere. Just so we think there's only living entities which we can see with our limited senses. Now, before they discovered or invented the microscope, then they didn't know there was tiny little living entities, microscopic in size. There's whole communities, just on the end of your finger. There's a whole civilization going on. Now, there's anywhere, you take a square, if you go out into the field here and you take a square inch and you take a microscope, if you look at your naked eye, you think, okay, there's maybe about a couple of blades of grass and a bit of dirt and maybe one worm or something like that. But if you look into that further, you'll see much, much, much more. Because of our limited senses, we cannot see perfectly that living entities exist in all the elements. So because we are living on the gross material platform, earthly platform, then we only perceive bodies which are made using gross material elements. But the living entities exist also within fire, within air, within the water, not just fish, but even more subtle living entities. And there are other disembodied living entities which don't have gross material bodies, such as Bhutas or ghosts. These different, in this way, we can understand that there are living entities everywhere. It's not that there's somewhere where you can go and there's no living entities. But just because we don't perceive it, then we think there's nothing. We're searching for generations. Is there life on other planets? And, it's interesting. Someone sent me a picture the other day of a huge radar pointing up into the sky. And it said, isn't it interesting that all human attempts to find intelligent life are pointing away from Earth? So if you didn't get that, then basically it's a statement saying that there's not much intelligent life to be found on Earth. And this is a manifestation of the living entity's desire to know more, to find out where do we come from? Why have we just been happy on this planet? You know, and before modes of transport were developed so that people can fly from one continent to another in a few hours, then most people hardly left their villages back in the days. I mean, even Javit and I used to find when we went up north of Scotland and we were travelling around islands and highlands, some of the folks there, they never left practically their own village in their whole life, isn't it? And they were quite satisfied and sure, you never been to the city? So I didn't have any need to go. And there's a certain mode of goodness in that. Although some other things they're doing are certainly mode of ignorance, like eating flesh and stuff. But still, there's a certain amount of mode of goodness there. And people are afraid of that because they think it's some kind of opulence to whiz here, there, and everywhere. And they feel as if it makes them a better person, but it's kind of wanderlust, really. That's what it is. It's never really satisfied. Just like sometimes you get people who... I seen one video recently of one guy who he used to do a lot of hiking, long hikes, and what do they call it, like trails. He used to do trails, and sometimes these chaps would, ladies as well, even single, they would go walking for months on end. And you can see perhaps why they would do that, because get in touch with nature, away from the big city, simple living, you know, not being trapped by a lifestyle that perhaps they find not very pleasurable. After doing this for some time, this boy who was previously promoting that he was going to do it until he was 80, he was going to keep himself fit in that, and then he said he was giving it up. I was interested because I thought maybe he's found something higher. And you can see that he's looking for something. So people do different things, and we're searching. We're, as it's mentioned in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Brahmande Bharati Konya Bhagavani Jeev Guru Krishna Prasadi Pai Bhaktilata Bij. So Brahmanda means the universe. It's another name for the universe, just like Jagat. The living entities wandering throughout the whole universe. We're wandering in different species. We're thinking, oh, maybe if I become a dolphin, it'll be cool. We'll try being a dolphin. But that's got its austerities. Just like sometimes we have some austerity in our service. We think, oh, maybe if I change my service, it won't be so troublesome. But you take your mind with you wherever you go, and that includes whatever species you go into. Krishna explains this in Bhagavad Gita, that the minds, the living entities' desires follow them, just like the, what's that analogy? Like the air carrying aroma. Is that it? So, living entity will go from one species to another, sometimes to a demigod, thinking, well, let me enjoy to a greater level. But still, we're trying to enjoy separately from Krishna. It's still separately from Krishna, so we still haven't actually completed our quest. Our quest in this material world really is to find that taste which we had in the spiritual world, and we're foolishly trying to do it even though we're not getting the taste we're looking for. But Maya is so powerful, she makes us think, oh, just one more step. We're like the donkey, and we think that carrot is in front of me. Sometimes the guy's sitting on the back of the donkey and he's got a carrot on the end of a stick. He's dangling it in front, and the donkey's thinking, one more step. No, I nearly got it there. Just one more. I nearly got it again. And then finally, at the end of the day, maybe he'll get the carrot if the owner feels a bit kind to him. And Prabhupada mentions that the donkey's working hard all day, not realizing that just at the side of the road there's grass everywhere. It can just stop and eat any time. It doesn't have to. So we're like that sometimes also. Now, working hard for Krishna and working hard in the material world is not the same thing. Totally different. Prabhupada says, we should use everything in Krishna's service, and we should work hard for Krishna. So work hard doesn't just mean physical, of course. It means because we have to use our intelligence, and we have to work on surrendering, overcoming our false ego. We have to work on our sadhana, trying to improve. So Krishna consciousness is an uphill climb. It's not just that you get to the top of the hill if you just stop. As long as you're going forward, you're getting closer to the top. If you stop halfway up, then it's more likely if you stay in one place too long, you probably go down before you go up. So when people talk about finding the level, Prabhupada calls this gliding. So it takes a lot of effort to get the glider. Another plane has to pull it up. And so this is a spiritual master. As long as we're connected to spiritual master, then we're up there. And that means connected to his instructions, connected to the Krishna conscious process. But if we think, let me just glide, I don't need to be, so connected like this. We can skimp on this, cut this corner like that. So then what happens is, it looks like we're flying, but gradually we're just coming down, and then finally comes back down to the ground again. So we don't want to treat Krishna consciousness like some kind of, what's the 8th offense against the holy name, Jayananda? Do you remember it? Yeah. Okay. Anyone else remember the rest of it?
To consider the chanting of Hare Krishna as an auspicious
ritualistic activity. Exactly. So thanks, Jayananda and Ashish. So to consider the chanting of Hare Krishna, or to consider the process of Krishna consciousness to be some kind of mundane thing to give some kind of material benefit. Material benefits will come automatically, but whether they're there or whether they're not, the devotee will continue serving, because sometimes, like they say, if Krishna gives you with your 2 hands, what can you hold? And if he takes from you with your 2 hands, what can you hold? Prabhupada said he experienced that himself. He tried to make a situation for his family, and he tried to make a Krishna conscious arrangement as well. He says, but ultimately came to the point where Krishna took it all away from him. And this is a verse which is there in the Shastra, that when Krishna looks favourably upon a living entity, it takes away everything from that person, therefore he's known as Hari. But he's not just taking it away so we can be miserable and he will laugh at us, like in some kind of sadistic way, make things difficult for us and then stand back and just watch us struggle. He's like the loving parent who'll take away things which are dangerous from the child. And sometimes if we're too stubborn, then we'll hang on to it, and then we may get a lesson. Just like one of Prabhupada's sons, Prabhupada had a table fan, and the son, young boy, child, he kept on wanting to reach and touch the fan, and Prabhupada kept on trying to stop him. Eventually he realised, his son was very determined to touch it, so he let him touch it. And then he got hurt, and then he started crying. And then once he stopped crying, Prabhupada says, "You want to touch the fan again?" "Oh, no." He'd learned from that. So this is the mercy of Krishna. He tries to protect us, but sometimes because we're so stubbornly attached, then we have to suffer before we realise. So the best type of, what's the first class intelligence? Hearing what?
Hearing of the consequences.
Exactly, yeah. So we hear of the consequences of engaging in material world. We hear the material world is a place of suffering, and then what happens once we hear? Then we don't engage in that, right? That's first-class intelligence. That simply by hearing we think, well, I'm not going to do that. If that's the case, we're so intelligent we think, oh, so that means that we have so much faith in Guru Sadhu and Shastra that just by hearing about it we think, okay, I believe that, I'll take that, so I won't go and do it. And then the second-class intelligence, experience. So we hear it, first of all, no, that would be third class.
For the second class, as we hear it, and then we're like not convinced, but then we see some other person that we know perhaps engaging in that activity, and we see that they suffer. So we see through somebody else's experience.
Yeah. So learn by others' mistakes. So that's second class intelligence, which is actually still a good class of intelligence. And third class intelligence, I know you just mentioned that. Yeah, so we hear about it, we don't change. We see others suffering, it doesn't change us, and then we suffer ourselves, and then we realise, okay, that is true, it applies to me as well, so therefore I'm not going to get involved. And then Prabhupada, he doesn't go to fourth class, he jumps to 10th class, just to emphasise, how foolish we are, which is anybody. We hear material world is a place of suffering, we see others suffering, we also suffer, and Ashish.
But we do nothing about it.
Yeah, we still don't do anything about it. So that is typically in Kali Yuga. We tend to often do that. To some degree, we've given up certain things which we've seen as suffering because practically we realise that we're just going to go from bad to worse. Or perhaps some of those things we've seen, we heard and we thought, oh yeah, not going to get involved in that. And then we see others, yeah, that makes sense. Look, that will happen to me as well if I do that. And in some things we did it ourselves and realised, yeah, I can relate to that. I got involved in that and it was a waste of time. But there's other aspects of our life where we don't do anything about it yet. Therefore, by the mercy of Guru Sadhu and Shastra, then the devotee will sometimes come in and cut and tell us that what we're doing is actually just causing us suffering. We're suffering and we don't know why. And then this knowledge is telling us why we're suffering, because we are, excuse the expression, hell-bent on enjoying separately from Krishna. So fortunately, we're waking up from that illusion, and there's others there who also want to wake up from that illusion. And by distributing this transcendental knowledge in the form of Srila Prabhupada's books, we can contact so many wonderful devotees out there. Lord Chaitanya said there's devotees in every town and village. Now, how do we know that? What if we go into a village and nobody's interested? Does that mean there's no devotees there? What does it mean?
So is that the question? Is that the question? How is the
Question, yeah.
How is the devotees in every town and village?
Yeah.
With the living entities in every town and village.
Exactly. Because there's living entities. So everywhere is full of devotees, just some are remembering and some are forgotten. That's all. And our purpose of going out there, sharing Krishna consciousness through book distribution, Harinam, giving out prasadam. We're just simply trying to follow the instruction of the spiritual master, which is to show compassion to the other fallen conditioned souls by trying to remind them of where they belong. And to begin with, they might not. But even the fact if they chase you away from their door or chase you down the street saying, oh, get away, you Hare Krishnas, you're a pain in the neck, go and get a proper job, or whatever they say, that doesn't matter. They've said Hare Krishna. So they've purified, they started chanting. So you've benefited that person just by them seeing you. Oh, look, there's a Hare Krishna over there. That person's just becoming reminded of Krishna. It's that simple. Prabhupada morning walk, a couple of times you can hear it. He's walking along and some other person's walking by and they say good morning, perhaps says Hare Krishna to him, or even says good morning. And then the person goes by and Prabhupada said his devotional service has begun. And that's because he's being friendly to a devotee. So therefore, that is also our duty, to be their best friend, to be the living entity's best friend. We're their best hope to get back to Krishna. There's not so many of us actively involved in this, so this Christmas marathon's coming up, and I've just gone over time, so Jabbit, you can switch the light off now. So I think we have no time for any questions unless there's anything really important. Nothing online? Okay.
It's a small question, Prabhu.
Okay, a small answer then.
So this philosophy, Mayavad philosophy, Brahma Satya Jagat Mithya, this world is false and Brahma is real. On a general level, with the outside of say spiritual level, it doesn't sound very convincing or any real or motivating. So how come there are so many in this world who are actually practicing or believing in it? What gets them into it?
Because ultimately it's convenient for the living entity to believe this, because then they don't have the accountability. People like to be unaccountable. And there's also a denial of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because we're in the material world due to envy, and it's another manifestation of envy, this Mayavadi. Prabhupada calls it the last snare of Maya, because even though someone may be a Brahmavadi or someone may be a Mayavadi, the difference is the Mayavadis are they're offenders to Krishna. They say Krishna's form is illusion, whereas the Brahmavadis, they're interested in spiritual life, but they just don't know about Krishna, like the four Kumaras. They weren't Mayavadis. They had already attained impersonal liberation, and when they smelt the Tulsi offer to Krishna, then they became personalists. So a Brahmavadi is someone with lesser knowledge but doesn't know, and when they get the higher knowledge, then they rise to that. The Mayavadi is someone who's offender against Krishna and who denies Krishna's form and qualities, characteristics, etc. So it's convenient for them because they want to remain in the material world and still the last snare of Maya, because as God's competitors, which is what we all are, trying to be the enjoyer, the controller of the material world, and vying for supremacy over each other, then the ultimate part of that is to become God yourself, which is a Mayavadi philosophy. Is that okay? Okay. Iskon Guruvinda ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande.